to protect ourselves. Self-defense emotion, so to speak. In fact, I would go so far as to say that anger is a survival emotion. That's a self-defense emotion. And your body immediately, when you get angry, when something threatens you, you're alert. You get into the fight or flight mode immediately, just that fast. If somebody crashed through that door right now, we all immediately would be in that fight or flight mode immediately. I mean, it happens just a reflex. It's not something, well, I think I better get angry about this. It doesn't work that way. Your body responds immediately. It's a physiological response. There are 1,400 biochemical responses that happen instantly when the trigger event takes place. True of everybody around the world. All humans have the same kind of response. Now, there are different ways of handling that response, but it is an instantaneous fight or flight response unless the person is totally not with us. So it's an emotional response. It's a secondary survival response. The primary emotions behind it are two: fear and hurt. Have you ever walked into a dark room and had somebody jump out and scare you? Your first feeling is fear, isn't it? What's your second one? You're kind of angry at them. What? Don't do that to me anymore. And if it's a real threatened situation, that anger comes out to help you defend yourself against that thing that's frightening you. But fear is one of the first responses we have. The second thing that we react to, fear causes us to be angry, but also if I kick Rob on the shin up here, he doesn't say anything, I may kick him again. So when I create pain in him, he says, hey, stop that, man. He gets angry to protect himself. Now, there are all degrees of fear and hurt, but that's the two basic roots behind all anger. Is that it's a self-defense survival emotion that God gave us to protect us, maybe from dinosaurs or Indians or whatever it might be. Today we need it against fork-tongued lawyers and other things of that nature in our culture. But we still need anger today in our culture. And it serves a real good purpose for it. If you walk into the house and somebody's abusing your child, you get angry. If your wife's being raped, you get angry. That anger serves to present a survival response to protect the innocent, the helpless. And it's very necessary. It's called warrior energy that we need to protect our loved ones and even fight for God. Jesus got angry at times. He didn't get out of control ever. But he expressed anger in the temple when he cleansed the temple. Go back and read John chapter 2, where he's cleansing the temple. He sees the money changers there, and you know what he does? He sits down and takes some rope and weaves a whip out of it. He doesn't just immediately go in there and start screaming and hollering. He weaves that whip and he stands up and says, get out of my Father's house! And he kicks over tables. He does what it takes to get the house cleansed. Well, there's a righteous type of anger, a righteous use of anger we'll talk about in a moment. But see, anger was never meant to manipulate, dominate, intimidate, hurt, abuse, or destroy another person. It was never meant for that at all. Okay? Anger is like a suit of armor that we wear to protect ourselves. You ever thought about that? That if I have a broken bone, I put a cast around it so you won't touch it. But if I've got emotional hurt, I put anger around it so you won't touch my soul, you won't touch my hurts. And so a lot of angry people are wearing that suit of armor to protect themselves. Okay? But anger also is a behavioral response. It's a physiological response. Our body responds. It's an emotional response, a secondary survival response. But there's a behavioral response. That anger energy is going to go someplace. All right? So let's talk about anger, hot or cold anger. Now, some of you may not have thought about that difference. But when you think about anger, what do you think about? Loud, ugly behaviors, screaming, hollering, cussing, maybe hitting, throwing things. One guy said anger is about a lot of small words. Hit, slap, shoot, kill, stab. That's what hot anger is all about. Now let's put hot anger on this wall up here because that's what most of us think of when we think of anger. It's screaming, hollering, cussing, throwing things, breaking things, hurting people. That's hot anger. And most of us in our culture have learned not to engage in that much hot anger. But there's another kind of anger, and we're going to put on this wall back here, that's just as dangerous, but it's called cold anger. It's passive-aggressive anger. It's the, well, if you spit on me, I can punch you back, or I can turn and ignore you and walk off. I'm just as angry either way, but one is a cold response, the other is an aggressive response. Passive-aggressive anger is cold anger. Sulking, silence, not talking, not hearing, forgetfulness, procrastination, all those kind of things are expressions. They can be anger expressions, but they're a cold response. The problem is that cold anger is still anger and can be turned around just like that into violence and anger. I was giving this presentation to some human resource people in Fort Worth years ago, and a lady came up afterwards and she said, "Man, that really helped me on that cold anger stuff." And she said we had about 5 different shops she worked in. She was HR over all of them, and they had to let a guy go at this one shop. And she said there was nothing obvious about him. I mean, we didn't think there's anything negative. I mean, he wasn't a gun collector and didn't threaten people, wasn't ugly. He's just real quiet, loner type. And when it came time for layoffs, he was the one we laid off. He just wasn't fitting in real well. And she said there was no problem with that, except 2 months later he came back to the locked area and told the receptionist there, said, "Susie, you know, when I left here, I didn't get a chance to tell everybody goodbye. Would you let me go back and tell them all goodbye?" And she said, called him by name, "Sure, go ahead." As he goes through, he pulls a 9mm, kills her, and killed 5 other people before he turned the gun on himself. And she said, "I never could figure out what happened in that situation." She said, "But the cold anger makes sense. Because it's still anger that person's carrying inside of them. And it can turn into explosive anger in the right type of situation." So that's cold anger. Now, is there any such thing as positive anger? Well, I think Jesus had positive anger. But positive anger is a phrase that means turning anger energy into a positive, constructive force. In other words, anger is an energy in our system, and when we use it in a positive way, then it's helpful. I'll give you one example I think was positive use of anger in my life. Back when I was a single guy 20 years ago, I had a date and went to a movie, and we were at the end of the movie. The movie had 2 sections like that in it. And I was sitting about 2 rows in and 3 or 4 seats over with my date. And about 15 minutes before the movie's over, a commotion happened down at the front of the theater. And boy, everybody's looking, it was loud, and you hear seats being kicked over, and a group of people stood up and was all trying to see what was happening down there. And that little crowd of people moved to the aisle, and a little boy says, "Help me, somebody help me." It was a little boy voice. We didn't know what was happening still. It was all dark in the theater. Well, they came up the aisle, they fell down about 2 rows in front of me, and I heard some more kicking, some skin hitting skin and stuff, you know, and man, I knew something wasn't right in that situation. And they stood up, and as they came past me, it was a man had a little 8-year-old, 9-year-old boy in a headlock. And he came to the back door of the theater, and he threw his body into the little boy's body into the door and shoved the door open with it. Well, I skipped over 3 or 4 seats. I caught him just outside the door. I said, "Hey, fellow, what do you think you're doing?" He said, "I'm taking this kid out of the theater." I said, "Not that way, you're not." 3 other guys had followed me out. We grabbed him and held him till the police came, because we thought he was physically abusing the child. Now, in my case, I'm not going to stand by and watch somebody physically abuse a child. I had some abuse in my own childhood, and so it's not going to happen if I'm there, if I can stop it some way. And so that's what reacted inside of me. And I even telling you the story right now, I feel the tingling in my body of that adrenaline rushing through me again. I felt like I had the strength of 10 elephants that night. And to me, that's positive anger. When we do something to protect the innocent, the helpless, the environment, protect our Lord and Savior, whatever it may be, that it's a valid way of expressing our anger. But there's appropriate ways to do it still. But that's positive anger. Lee Iacocca said this. He said, a little righteous anger really brings out the best in the American personality. Our nation was born when 56 patriots got mad enough to sign the Declaration of Independence. We put a man on the moon because Sputnik made us mad at being number 2 in space. Getting mad in a constructive way is good for the soul and the country. Lee Iacocca. But to give you some other examples, there was a lady named Candy Lightner. Some of you may know who I'm talking about. She had a 13-year-old daughter killed by a drunk driver. And she developed a program called Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And that's been the most successful program we've had in our culture to get drunk drivers off the road. But she took her anger and her pain and grief and turned it into a constructive program to help solve the problem. Another one was John Walsh, the fellow that has the TV's America's Most Wanted. He had an 8-year-old son that was abducted and killed. And he took his anger and his monies and so forth and turned that into a constructive program, America's Most Wanted. Thank you so much. My voice started breaking up on me there. Thank you. So that's another example of what John Walsh did. There's a group of dads in Des Moines, Omaha, Nebraska. A group of dads formed a group called Mad Dads. They were African-American fathers in a ghetto section of the city, and they were sick and tired of the gangs and stuff running the streets. So they started walking the streets. A group of dads would just go out, not carrying clubs, guns, or anything, just a group of positive men going up and talking to the people in the gangs. And it's been so successful, getting the gangs off the street is now spread to over 13 cities across the country. Just putting positive masculine energy back on the streets. So almost all of the Reformation type of movements like Martin Luther King, Abraham Lincoln, Gandhi, all these had some anger component in that, and it's that positive anger that does good. It's when we take that energy that we feel and turn it into something positive to help other people. Now, most people don't think they're very angry because we hide our anger from ourselves. So how do we hide our anger from ourselves? You ever thought about that? Maybe you're more angry than you realize. I was. First time I ever went in for counseling years ago, the counselor heard all my story and he shook his head and said, "Boy, it's a good thing you play football." And I said, "Well, yeah, I think so. I played ball at A&M when I was in college." And he said, "It's a good thing you play football." And I said, "Well, yeah, I think so. Why are you saying that?" He said, "Well, you've got so much anger and rage in you could have been a murderer." Well, it got my attention because I'd never considered myself an angry person. But now looking back with what I know today, I very definitely was very angry. I had a lot of anger inside of me. On the football field was the only place it came out, though. And I can tell you a lot of stories about that. But during the year when there was not any football going on, I would get very depressed during the off season, on weekends and so forth. And repressed anger often becomes depression. So I got married after college, and my wife said, "You're angry, aren't you?" I said, "No, I'm a little irritated," or I'd say, "I'm a little ticked." You know, I wouldn't use the word anger or hostile or that kind of stuff, and I wouldn't cuss at her or anything. But she just saw that I had anger there. But I made it less ominous sounding. "Oh, I'm a little irritated," or "I'm tired," or "I'm frustrated." So we changed the wording to make it more palatable to us. But it's still anger. We already talked about passive-aggressive disguises for our anger. Withdrawal, not speaking, ignoring, forgetfulness, procrastination, not hearing. And this happens quite often in marriage where one spouse will tune the other one out. And they think they need a hearing aid, but really and truly they've just got emotional and got it turned off. That happens a lot. Huh? Yeah. I've already figured this out about you. So it's passive-aggressive disguise. Now another one is hiding your anger by internalizing, or somatic disguises, where you take the anger and put it into your body and you just hold it inside, and it begins to create things. Rheumatoid arthritis and things of that nature have been closely connected to anger. And back pain, low back pain, 80% of that is emotional and not physical cause. And so there are a lot of ways that I was working with a young lady that every time she gets a job, she gets stressed out. And when she gets stressed out and internalize the anger and stress, she gets all these allergy reactions and so forth start going. So she can't hold a job. And so she had this job and she was working there and got real irritated with two ladies she worked with. And next thing I know, she's missing work every other day or so because she's internalizing the anger instead of talking to the people at work and telling them how upset she is about it. She can't do that. So that's another way, internalizing somatic disguises.